son called me on a Tuesday. Not a Sunday, not a holiday, not my birthday. A random Tuesday in March, which should have been my first warning. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important. Can I come over this weekend?" I told him, of course. I told him my door was always open. I meant it too, because that's the kind of father I've always been. The kind who means it. His name is Derek. He's 32 years old, broad-shouldered like I used to be before the years got to me, with his mother's eyes and, as I've come to understand, very little of her conscience. My wife Carol passed 4 years ago from ovarian cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the end. I still haven't fully processed that. I don't think I ever will. What I can tell you is that after she was gone, Derek became everything to me. He was the last piece of her I had left, and I held on to that, maybe a little too tight. Maybe a lot too tight. I live alone now in the same house in Naperville, Illinois, where Derek grew up. 3 bedrooms, a big backyard, a garage full of Carol's gardening tools. I haven't been able to give away. I'm 67 years old, retired from 31 years as a mechanical engineer, and I have a pension, a modest savings account, and a certificate of deposit I set aside specifically for emergencies. Carol and I built that safety net together over decades. We called it the sleep-at-night money. The fund that let us close our eyes without worrying about what would happen if the furnace blew or a hospital bill landed out of nowhere. When Derek called that Tuesday, I didn't think about the sleep-at-night money. I thought about my son. He arrived Saturday morning around 10. I'd made coffee and put out the blueberry muffins he liked from the bakery down the street. He hugged me at the door, which he hadn't done in a while. A real hug, not the sideways half hug you give someone you're tolerating. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, where he used to do his homework, and for a few minutes we just talked. His job at the logistics company in Schaumburg. The apartment he shared with his girlfriend, Melissa. Whether the Bears had any shot at a real season. Then he folded his hands on the table and looked at me the way Carol used to look at me when she was about to say something she'd been rehearsing. "Dad, I want to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I nodded. "Melissa and I want to buy a house. We've been saving, but the market's brutal right now, and we're about $12,000 short for the down payment and closing costs. We have everything else figured out. We have the pre-approval, we have a realtor, we found a place in Plainfield that's perfect. We just need this one thing to fall into place, and then we're set." He paused. "I was hoping you might be able to help with the gap. $12,000. He said it like it was $1,200, like it was a small thing, a bridge, a momentary inconvenience between where they were and where they wanted to be. I asked him the questions a reasonable father asks. Was the house in their price range long-term? Was Melissa's income stable? What were the property taxes? He had answers for everything, smooth and prepared, and at the time I read that as responsibility. I thought, look at my son, he's done his homework, he's being an adult about this. Carol would have been proud. I told him I'd think about it. He hugged me again on the way out. At the door he turned back and said, "You're the best dad, you know that. I don't tell you enough." And I stood in the doorway and watched him back out of the driveway, and I felt something warm in my chest that I now recognize was not pride. It was something being carefully placed there like a hook baited with exactly what I needed to hear. 3 days later I called him and said I would help. I wired him $12,000 from the savings account. Not the CD. I kept some boundary at least. I wrote it down in a little notebook I keep in the kitchen drawer. The way you write things down when some part of you already suspects you'll need the record later. That was September. In October, Derek texted me that the house deal had fallen through. Seller backed out, he said. They were devastated. They were looking at other options. I told him I was sorry and asked if he needed me to do anything. He said no, they'd figure it out. I offered to have him over for dinner. He said he was busy, but maybe next week. Next week came and went. In November, he called me again. Dad, there's something else. And I know the timing is terrible. I know. But Melissa and I have been talking, and we want to get married. I felt a complicated joy at that. I'd liked Melissa well enough the few times I'd met her. Quiet girl, pretty, worked in HR at a hospital in Oak Park. I'd always assumed they'd get married eventually. I told him that was wonderful news. We want to do it right, he said. Not a courthouse thing. A real wedding. Melissa's always dreamed about it, but Dad, her parents are in Arizona, and they're not in a position to help much financially, and I don't want to disappoint her. She deserves to have the wedding she's always wanted. I heard Carol's voice in my head just for a second. She used to say, pay attention to the architecture of what people want from you. I didn't listen. How much are we talking? I asked. Venues in the area book for anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 for a weekend. Catering, photographer, flowers. It adds up fast. We've been getting quotes. We're trying to be realistic. Derek, how much? A pause. $28,000. That would cover everything. Venue, food, photography, flowers, Melissa's dress. Everything. You'd be giving your future daughter-in-law the wedding of her dreams, Dad. I don't think there's a better way to spend money than that. The wedding of her dreams. I turned that phrase over in my mind. I thought about Carol and our wedding in 1983 at a church in Evanston with 80 guests and the reception in the church hall. We'd spent $3,000 and it was the happiest day of my life. But times change, I told myself. Everything costs more. Young people have different expectations. I said I needed to think about it. He said, of course, Dad, take your time. The venue we love has a date open in June, but I don't want to pressure you. He mentioned the date 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. I broke the CD. I'm not proud of that. I paid the early withdrawal penalty, and I wired Derek $28,000 with a note that said, for you and Melissa. Your mother would have loved to be there. He called me immediately when it landed, voice full of something that sounded like gratitude, and said, Dad, you have no idea what this means to us. You're going to have the best seat in the house. Right up front, father of the groom. I promise. Father of the groom. I wrote that down too. January. February. I asked about the wedding planning a few times. Had they booked the venue, confirmed the date, started on invitations? Derek was always in the middle of something. He'd text back later. The venue was handled. The date was June 14th. Everything was coming together, he said. In March, I mentioned to my neighbor Frank, who's known Derek since he was 8 years old, that the wedding was in June. Frank said he hadn't heard anything about it. I thought that was a little strange, but told myself that Derek wasn't close with the neighbors anymore, that he'd moved on, that this was normal. In April, I asked Derek directly, have you set a guest list? I want to make sure I have the right date blocked off. He said the list was still being finalized. Melissa had a lot of family coming from Arizona. He'd send me the details soon. In May, he went quiet, 3 weeks without a real conversation. My texts got one-line replies. I told myself he was busy with planning. That's how weddings work, right? The last month is chaos. I gave him space because I didn't want to be the clingy father. I didn't want to be a burden. I had spent most of Derek's adult life trying not to be a burden, and looking back, I think he understood that about me and used it with a precision that still takes my breath away. June 14th came and went. I spent that Saturday the way I spend most Saturdays. Coffee in the morning, a walk around the block, lunch at the kitchen table, whatever game was on in the afternoon. I remember thinking at some point in the early evening, the wedding is today. I remember thinking Derek would probably call that night or the next morning, exhausted and happy, wanting to tell me how it went. I kept my phone nearby. He didn't call Saturday, he didn't call Sunday. I told myself, they're on their honeymoon, they're exhausted. Let them breathe. Monday I drove to their apartment in Schaumburg. I'm not sure why exactly. I hadn't planned to. I was on my way to the hardware store and I took the exit almost on instinct. The way you sometimes do when something in you is asking a question your conscious mind hasn't fully formed yet. I knocked on the door. Melissa answered. She was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, hair pulled back. She looked startled to see me, and for just a fraction of a second, I almost missed it. Something moved across her face that wasn't surprise. It was closer to guilt. "Oh, hi, Robert. We weren't expecting you." "I was in the area," I said. "I wanted to congratulate you both. How was the wedding?" She opened her mouth, closed it, stepped back slightly into the apartment, and I could see over her shoulder that Derek had appeared in the hallway. He was very still. She started. "It was great, Dad," Derek said. He walked to the door. "Come in." I came in. I sat on their couch. The apartment looked the same as it always had. Same furniture, same view of the parking lot, same faint smell of coffee. I looked around for any sign of the day before yesterday. Flowers, cards, luggage packed for a trip. Nothing obvious. "Tell me about it," I said. "The venue, the ceremony, everything. I want to hear all of it." There was a pause, not long, but long enough to mean something. Derek sat down across from me. He looked at Melissa, who sat beside him, and looked at the floor. Then he looked at me, and I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. The rapid, quiet math of someone deciding how much the truth was going to cost them. "Dad," he said carefully, "the wedding was a week ago. I let that sit in the air between us. June 7th, he said. "We moved a temp. We had to adjust some things with the venue." "You moved the date," I said. "Yes, and you didn't tell me." He looked down. "It happened fast. We meant to. There just wasn't. Derek." I kept my voice even. "This is something I've learned over 67 years. The quieter you get, the more space a lie has to stand in, and eventually, it can't hold its own weight. Was I on the guest list?" The silence that followed that question was the loudest thing I've heard since the doctor called me with Carol's final results. Melissa stood up and said she was going to get some water. She didn't come back. Derek looked at his hands. "We kept it really small, Dad. Just immediate family. Melissa's parents and siblings. It was low-key, not what we'd originally planned. Things changed, and I'm your father," I said. "I'm your only living parent. I paid for that wedding." "I know. Was I on the list or not? Dad, yes or no?" "No." He said it quietly, like if he said it quietly enough it might not land. It landed. I sat with that for a moment. The blueberry muffins I used to buy him. The homework at the kitchen table. 32 years of being his father. Of being whatever he needed me to be. The sleep-at-night money that was no longer there. The CD that was broken. The $40,000. 12 for the house that never happened. 28 for the wedding I didn't attend. The house, I said, the one in Plainfield. The seller who backed out. He didn't answer right away. "Where did that 12,000 go, Derek?" "We used it for... We had debts. Credit cards. And we needed first and last for this apartment when our lease reset, and the 28,000. He was quiet. "Derek, the $28,000 I wired you for your wedding. We used what we needed for the wedding. It was smaller than planned, Dad, so it didn't cost as much. The rest went to, we had things we needed. A car payment we were behind on. Melissa's student loans." I stood up. I am 67 years old, and I don't move as fast as I used to. But I stood up and I put on my jacket and I picked up my keys from where I'd set them on their coffee table. And I did all of this slowly, deliberately, because I needed a moment to decide what kind of man I was going to be in the next 60 seconds. I walked to the door. Dad, I need to go home, I said. I know you're upset, and I want to explain. I'm not upset. I turned and looked at him, and this is the truest thing I can tell you. I was not upset in that moment. I was something older and quieter than upset. I was the thing that comes after upset. When you're done being surprised, I'm going home. I have some things to take care of. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table. I opened the drawer and I took out the little notebook and I looked at what I'd written. 12,000 September. 28,000 November. Total $40,000. Then I sat in the quiet of that house for a long time. 3 weeks passed. I did not call Derek. He texted me twice. Once to ask if I was okay, once to say he hoped we could talk soon. I did not respond. I was not giving him the silent treatment. I was genuinely busy. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia who I've worked with for 15 years. I told her I needed to update my will. She didn't ask questions, she's a professional, but she made a note and scheduled me for the following week. When I sat across from her desk, I said simply that I wanted Derek removed as the primary beneficiary. My estate, what remained of it, would go to Carol's sister Margaret and to the Naperville chapter of the American Cancer Society in Carol's name. Patricia nodded and started making notes. I called my financial advisor next. I told him I wanted a full accounting of what I had left, what I could live on comfortably through my 80s, assuming average health, and what the realistic picture looked like with $40,000 gone. The answer was not catastrophic, but it was sobering. There would be no big trips. There would be no helping a future grandchild with college. Though I now doubted whether that was ever going to be my concern anyway. The sleep at night money was gone, and I was going to have to rebuild it slowly on a fixed income in my late 60s. I also talked to my neighbor Frank. I told him the whole story over coffee in his kitchen because Frank is 71 years old and has seen everything and doesn't judge and doesn't gossip. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute and then he said, "Robert, I always wondered about that kid." I didn't ask him what he meant. I think I already knew. About a month after I'd left their apartment, Derek called. I answered this time. "Dad, I'm really glad you picked up. Can we please talk? Can I come over?" I said yes. He arrived on a Saturday, same as the first time. No muffins from the bakery this time. I made coffee and sat across from him at the kitchen table and waited. He apologized. A real apology. I'll give him that much. Or I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that it was real. He said he was ashamed of himself. He said he'd been under financial pressure for years, things he hadn't told me, that he'd convinced himself the money would be repaid, that he'd made terrible decisions. He said Melissa felt awful too. He said he didn't know how to fix it, but he wanted to try. I listened to all of it. When he finished, I said, "I've updated my will." He was quiet. "I've also spoken to an attorney about the money. Legally, what you did wasn't theft, because I gave it willingly, but I want you to understand that I gave it based on what you told me it was for, and what you told me wasn't the truth." Dad, I'm not finished. I don't know yet what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward. I need time to figure that out, and I need you to give me that time without pushing. What I do know is that I will not be a source of financial support for you anymore, not because I'm punishing you. Because I can't afford to be, and because clearly I wasn't helping you by being one. I paused. Your mother and I spent 30 years building what we had. You took a large piece of that in 6 months. I think you should understand the weight of that. He looked like he might cry. I don't know if he did, because I was looking at my coffee cup. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. A real moment, not a performance. "Pay me back if you're ever able," I said. "Not because I'll be counting on it, just because it would mean something about who you decided to become." He left an hour later. At the door he hugged me, the same kind of hug as that first Saturday. A real hug, arms all the way around. I let him hold on. I'm still his father. That doesn't stop, even when you wish certain parts of it would. Some nights I sit in the living room with the lights off, and I think about Carol. I think about what she would have said about all of this, and honestly, I think she would have seen it coming long before I did. She was always the perceptive one. She had this way of watching people, not suspiciously, just carefully, like she was reading something in them that she wanted to understand before she committed to trusting them fully. I trusted too fast. I always have. With Derek it was worse, because he was mine, because loving him was the easiest thing I'd ever done. And it's very hard to be a careful reader of someone you love that much. But here's what I've learned, in case it's useful to anyone listening. Love isn't the same as an open account. Being a good father doesn't mean having no limits. The most enabling thing I ever did was make Derek believe that my resources and my forgiveness were both bottomless, and he tested that belief, and I can't pretend I didn't hand him the tools to do it. I'm rebuilding the sleep-at-night money slowly. Some months it's $200 into savings. Some months it's $500. It's not impressive, but it's mine. It's honest. It doesn't go anywhere I haven't decided it should go. Derek and I have dinner occasionally. Every month or so, somewhere neutral, a diner in Naperville, where I've been going for years. We talk about surface things mostly. The bears, the weather. What I've been doing around the house. It's careful and a little sad, and it's what we have, and I'm trying to decide if it's enough or if enough is even the right question. Melissa sends me a card on Father's Day. It's a nice gesture. I keep them. Last month, Derek mentioned very carefully that they were hoping to buy a house again, that the market had shifted a little, that they were saving. I told him that sounded like a good plan. I told him I hoped it worked out. He waited a moment, the way you wait when you're hoping someone will offer something more. I picked up the menu and asked the waitress if they still had the turkey melt-on special. They did. I ordered it. It was good. Some things I've decided I get to keep for myself now. Not out of bitterness. I want to be clear about that. Out of something harder to name and maybe more important, the quiet understanding that I earned what I have, and what's left of it belongs to whatever life I'm still going to live. Carol would have ordered the turkey melt too. That's enough for me. I've been thinking a lot lately about the $40,000, but not in the way you might expect. I don't lie awake counting it. What I think about is how I handed it over in pieces. 12,000 first, then 28, and how each time I told myself I was being a good father. That's the part that stays with me, not the money. The story I told myself while I was giving it away. There's a version of me that wants to say Derek is simply a bad person. It would be easier that way, but I know better. Because I watched him become who he is, and I was holding the camera the whole time. Every time I covered something, he should have covered himself. Every time I stepped in before he had a chance to feel the weight of his own decisions, I was teaching him something. I taught him that consequences were negotiable, that love meant rescue, that I would always be standing at the bottom of whatever he fell from, arms out, no questions asked. He learned his lessons well. I just didn't understand I was the one giving them. That's what I mean when I say cause and effect isn't complicated, even when it's painful. Derek didn't wake up one day and decide to deceive me. He followed a path I'd been paving for years, and when he reached the end of it, he found $40,000 and a father who'd never once made him uncomfortable enough to grow. I'm not letting him off the hook. What he did was wrong, and he knows it, and I told him so directly. but I'd be dishonest if I pretended I had no hand in building the man who did it. The hardest kind of intelligence isn't the kind that solves problems. It's the kind that looks at your own choices without flinching. I wasn't able to do that while Carol was alive because she balanced me out in ways I didn't fully appreciate until she was gone. She would have asked harder questions about that first 12,000. She would have slowed me down. Without her, I substituted generosity for wisdom. And I paid for that substitution in a currency I spent 30 years accumulating. What I'm rebuilding now, slowly, $200 at a time back into a savings account, isn't just money. It's a clearer understanding of what I owe people and what I don't. I owe Derek my honesty. I owe him a real relationship if he's willing to earn one back. I don't owe him a financial safety net that lets him avoid becoming someone worth trusting. Strength, I've learned at 67, isn't the ability to give without limit. It's the ability to hold a line even when the person on the other side of it is someone you love. That takes more out of you than writing a check ever did, but it leaves you with something a check never could. The quiet, unglamorous knowledge that you finally stood for something. Carol knew that. I'm still catching up.